All right, everybody, Michael Cohen here with you on Sports Talk Nation. Let's talk about this Jets' first game of the preseason because, hey, look, we all know preseason. There's not a lot to discuss, not a lot to get excited about, but the preseason game did happen, so let's talk a little bit about it and some training camp as well. All right, so again, the Jets winning over the Washington Commanders 20-17 in the opener of their preseason slate. And as I said, hey, look, it's preseason. There's really not a lot to get too excited about. Most of the starters did not play. A lot of the big names, of course, all sat out the game. Aaron Rodgers obviously sat out the game. Breece Hall, Sauce Gardner. The Williams brothers, Quincy and Quinton Williams, all those guys were not going to play in this game, so really no surprise there. So really what you're looking at in a game like this is depth. That's what you're really focused on. That's what the coaches are focused on for the most part in these kind of games. And we got some answers about some of the depth about this Jets roster. Now, of course, if the biggest takeaway, for me anyway, was going to be the defensive line, because the Jets have a concern right now in the defensive line, and that is the fact that Hasson Reddick still has not shown up to camp. He has been fined, $50,000 a day since the start of training camp. That's now 3 weeks in. It's over $1 million that he has been fined, and it looks like there is no end in sight. According to The Athletic, and that is Zach Rosenblatt, there is a belief that this holdout could extend into the regular season, and if that were the case, that would be a catastrophic nightmare for Gang Green. So it's very important for them, even in these games, to try to see if they can find some answers on that defensive line that can fill that void left by a guy who came into town when the Jets traded for him back in April that could get a lot of sacks, 7, 8, 9 sacks a season. They would love to have that guy. Of course, they let Bryce Huff walk away to the Eagles, and then, oddly enough, made that trade with the Eagles to get Hasson Reddick in town. And now the Jets can't seem to get him in town at all at this moment in time. So Will McDonald was certainly a guy who I was paying attention to in his preseason game. Now, he has had a good camp by what you hear from the Jets is that he's put on some muscle. He has certainly gotten faster. He's been a much better player. I mean, look at the highlights of in camp in the scrimmage against Washington. He is just a monster off the snap, getting to the quarterback, causing a fumble by Jaden Daniels. He looked good, and even in this game at times showed some good burst off the line. Now, he also got hit with a late hit on the quarterback penalty as well, so that was not good. But he has shown some burst, and the Jets are hoping that they can get a lot more out of him. Hey, look, this was a guy who was a first-round pick in 2023, so they definitely need Hasson Reddick Will McDonald IV to step up until they can get Hasson Reddick back in camp. So that was really the player that I was really watching most of all, even though he didn't play a whole heck of a lot. Now, also watching this defensive line, a couple of guys stood out in the depth chart. And that was Leonard Taylor III and Bruce Hector. Both of those guys, man, they got into the backfield a lot against Washington. Taylor had a sack. He had a couple of tackles for loss. Hector, he had a tackle for loss. He had 4 tackles overall. Both those guys were really disruptive, and it's good to see. Now we'll see how those guys are going to fit into a rotation on the front seven on the defensive line. Give some of those guys like Quinton Williams a little bit of a breather here and there. That's good to see that the Jets have those kind of players who can provide that kind of depth. So you have to like what you saw from there. The secondary, of course, we all know the secondary is all about Sauce Gardner and also DJ Reed. And, of course, a lot of talk this year going since the draft about Quantez Stiggers, who has done a great job in camp and, as we all know, has that great background and that great story in which he almost gave up on football and then went to the CFL and never played college football and still ended up getting drafted by the Jets. I believe it was the 6th round, I believe. Tremendous story outside it, but he really wasn't the featured player in this game against Washington. That's fine because we want to see what the depth is like. The guy that really stood out in this game was Jerick Bernard converse because he got tested early. He gave up a big pass at the start of the game that helped Washington set up its first touchdown of the game. But then he just shut Washington down after that. He had a couple of deflections. It was hard for receivers to get off of him. He was tremendous. He was all over those receivers for Washington. So Jerick Bernard Converse did a very nice job and kind of threw himself into the mix of being maybe a fourth corner, maybe even a nickel guy that the Jets could rely on maybe perhaps down the road. On the other side of the ball, and while a lot of people will talk about a little bit about Olu Fashanu, who came in and played a few snaps in the first half and looked pretty good at left tackle, and that's certainly understandable because he is certainly working with Tyron Smith to learn that position, and that's one thing I love what the Jets did to bring in that veteran player like they did with Smith, let him be the starter, and then you draft for the future with a guy like Olu Fashanu, and he is going to be a good player for the Jets down the road, you would have to imagine. But this was really about five different players on the offensive side of the ball for me. One, Malachi Corley, the player that the Jets drafted high this year in the draft, speedy receiver out of Western Kentucky, and he had kind of an uneven day. He had a catch in the first quarter and ended up losing yards on his first catch as he was trying to turn something out of nothing and ended up losing yards instead of gaining yards. Then he misjudged a punt, didn't call for a fair catch, got tackled right away. You're like, it's not a good start. But then a heads-up play later on saved what could have been a fumble and got some yards out of it. So a good heads-up play on Corley's part, and then wound up with 4 catches for 27 yards, helped the Jets move the football, especially on their drive that led to a touchdown for Andrew Peasley that helped the Jets tie this game up at one point at 7-7. So Corley, rough start, but a good finish for him in his first action in the NFL, in preseason action for that matter. Braelon Allen, I should say, and Isaiah Davis. Boy, those two guys just add depth to that chart on running back. It was interesting to note that Israel Abanikanda dropped all the way now to 4th on this depth chart because Braelon Allen got the start today, and then you saw Davis come in. Both of those guys showed a lot of power. I thought that Allen showed a lot of power downhill running in this game for the Jets. He was very impressive. In fact, his final stat line, take it again. It's preseason. You take it for what it is. 54 yards and 6 carries, about 9 yards a carry. 24 yards was his long. And then Isaiah Davis, 4 catches for 33 yards. He also had a 24-yard run after a catch. So those two guys looked very good in their debuts. And then finally the quarterback position. Now, look, we all know it begins and ends with Aaron Rodgers. And you have Tyrod Taylor there as well, who's going to be your backup. But what about the third quarterback situation? Because, again, Jordan Travis, player the Jets drafted in this draft out of FSU, still trying to, work his way back from the leg injury last year with Florida State. They have a couple of guys there in camp right now competing for potentially the third spot, maybe even a spot on the practice squad in Andrew Peasley and Adrian Martinez, and both are very good. Peasley obviously had the touchdown pass, was 8 for 11. He looked good. But I thought Adrian Martinez was more impressive, the way he was able to move in and out of the pocket, make plays with his legs, and also throw off schedule and throw accurately off schedule. 6 out of 10, 104 yards. And, look at that one play there to Brandon Smith. My goodness, 37 yards right down the sideline. Great job by Adrian Martinez as he led the Jets' comeback to win that game. They were down 17-10, and they ended up winning the game 20-17. So, again, it's preseason. You take for what it is. You're just looking at depth, and you're looking to see how some of the young pieces are looking and how they could help the Jets or your team down the road. Of course, as we take a look at this preseason, the way this training camp has gone, honestly, everything you're hearing, Aaron Rodgers looks great. He has looked great in camp. He has been sharp, and he looks ready to go. A lot of that stuff about Rodgers and Garrett Wilson going at it and having banters back and forth at times. Look, it's not that big of a deal right now. Of course, if we do see that happen in the regular season, and we see Wilson and Rodgers kind of chewing each other out a little bit on the sideline. You know what's going to happen. The camera's going to be on it. And you're going to have guys commenting about, oh, my goodness, what's going on the Jets sideline? Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson are having a disagreement. Again, two very competitive guys trying to get on the same page. You rather they see them have this kind of conversation now in the training camp session and in preseason than, let's say, in week 1 in San Francisco. So if that's what it takes right now for them to get on track and get on the same page, so be it. Hey, look, in all the highlights that you see that people are throwing up on social media, they look like they're finding ways to get on the same page because Rodgers is throwing bombs, Wilson's making great catches, in training camp anyway, and so far things have looked pretty good. So we move right along here from that standpoint. Obviously, health is the most important thing for the Jets, but to me, the biggest story of concern is going to be Hasson Reddick's holdout. When is this going to come to an end? As I mentioned earlier, Zach Rosenblatt says that there's always the chance that this could drag on into the regular season, and if it does, that would be a huge, huge problem for the Jets and what they want to do defensively here in 2024. So that's where we stand, folks. Leave your thoughts below. We'll talk to you next time.